Welcome to Tales from the Trenches Tuesday. Today, it is my honor to have Julia Worthington with us. So Julia Worthington has been a fundraiser for over 25 years, working as a volunteer and professional fundraiser for national, regional, and international charities. Julia has always been a generalist fundraiser, starting out as a sole fundraiser with the Railway Children, an international development NGO trying out all types of fundraising. She later became head of fundraising for the Prince's Trust. Corporate fundraising became one of her favorite income streams, with a career highlight being winning Best Charity Partnership internationally for a partnership with SSP Rail UK Limited. For the last 11 years, she's been a consultant, trainer, coach, and mentor, running her own consultancy, Amber Consulting. In 2000, Julia created 6 Simple Steps to a Corporate Fundraising Strategy, a training program that helps fundraisers to develop their first corporate partnerships from scratch. Julia focuses her attention on smaller charities working with many generalist fundraisers, supporting their career development through her training courses, webinars, and Facebook groups, like Corporate Fundraising Chat. Julia is also the trainer for CIOF Corporate Fundraising Management Level course. So welcome, Julia.
Thank you.
Just changing gears for a second, you are in, your niche is corporate philanthropy, which I think is really impressive. So in Canada, about 85% of donations come from individuals, and then the other 15%, some is corporate and some is foundation. And I would say you could take the foundation and almost split it in half, where half of it is a corporate foundation and half of it is an individual foundation. Is that about the same kind of ratios and percentages in the UK?
I know the figures. So I know it's 56 billion is what is donated to charities in the UK. And I know that of that, 2.7 billion is corporate. So what percentage is that? I don't know.
Yeah, so that's like 4 or 5%, something like that.
Yeah. And a lot of that is in kind.
It's pretty close.
Yeah.
Right.
So you've got a mix there.
So most definitely. On the corporate side, charities on both sides of the ocean have enjoyed a high level of corporate philanthropy. In the US, much more than in Canada, corporate social responsibility initiatives are well established and commonly practiced. So what's happening on the other side of the world where you are?
So I've noticed a real change and a real shift with corporate fundraising certainly in the last 12 months. For years we've had CSR, corporate social responsibility. There was no real push behind that from government or investors to make businesses do it. And what's happened recently is we had something called COP26 in the UK a few years ago, which was a meeting of governments from all over the world. And since then, there's been a push to something called ESG. So ESG is like the child of CSR. So ESG stands for Environment, Social and Governance. And where the charities sit in that, most charities, unless they're a climate change charity, would sit in the social part of that, because that's all about community and what you're doing to support your local community, what you're doing around diversity and inclusivity and that sort of thing. So that's where most charities, cause-led charities, would sit. Then there's the E, which is the environment bit, which is obviously if you're a climate change or you're a conservation charity, then you would be sitting in the E part as well. And that has been driven by government, very much driven by government. And if people, businesses, construction companies in particular, are putting in tenders to work for local authorities or any kind of anchor organisation like that, they are having to include within that what they are doing around their ESG, and in particular what they are doing around something called social value. Social value, I don't know whether you're using that term in North America yet.
No.
So social value for us, and this is something I've learned a lot about in the last 12 months, is a construction company will put a bid in to maybe build a new hospital or something like that, and they score points on that tender. And now 10% of the point scoring is around social value. So it's around what they will do in the local community to employ local people, to engage with the local community and support the local community. So I work for a charity that works with homeless people, homeless veterans, and when somebody's putting a bid in, they can say, okay, we are going to employ 300 new people on this project. And of those, 5 of them will be homeless people who've previously been homeless. Now, for each one of those homeless people that they plan to offer a job to, they score an amount. So they score £26,000 against each person. So there, if they say they employ 5, that's £150,000 they've scored on that tender. And some of them are looking at putting £1 million worth of social value into their tenders in terms of going into schools and doing workshops on, CVs or finance or careers in construction, or also, putting a new playground in for the local area where there's deprivation, all sorts of different things. They're looking to put, £1 million worth of stuff into their bid. And that then will score them points, which allows them to win the tender, and then they have to deliver that afterwards. So that's something that is happening big time over here at the moment. And part of the drive behind it, some of it is government drive, but a lot of it is investors. So big investors, the banks and the venture capitalists are looking at, okay, the businesses that are actually doing stuff around social value and ESG are actually more successful, and that's proven in the FTSE 100, that they are making more profits. So actually investors now are also driving that move into ESG and social value, which can only be good for us as charities and voluntary organisations.
Wow, that's really impressive. So many times here, it's just, low bid takes it, especially if it has anything to do with government, where the government is having a component. So that's pretty impressive. There's been a big push on the corporate side here, almost a push back against colonialism and everything that's kind of come through with that. In Canada, we had, the Indigenous schools. We had it actually, embarrassingly enough, up until the 1980s.
Amazing.
We had residential schools. So, they're kind of doing a whole introspective look and really trying to promote those Indigenous communities as much as they possibly can. But it's coming with some pushback, right? So, Canada's first prime minister, there was an expressway in Ottawa that was named after him. But, he was one of the designers of the residential schools years ago through colonialism. And they since have now, in the last month or two, they've removed his name from that parkway, and they renamed it an Indigenous name to that parkway. Are you seeing stuff like that, kind of pushback in the UK?
Yeah, definitely. We had a couple of years ago, we had something in Bristol, which was big news over here, where some protesters went and pulled down a statue of somebody who'd made a lot of money from slavery. Bristol is a big port in the UK and was one of the big ports where cotton would have come in, but there would have been people trafficking as well. And so they pulled down the statue, and there'd been a lot of work done previously to try and get it removed democratically, and it hadn't been removed democratically. So this group took it into their own hands, pulled it down and threw it into one of the wharfs in Bristol. So that caused a huge amount of furore over here. Both sides, people saying, we shouldn't be pulling down statues. But equally, when we look around our institutions tend to celebrate white men. And there's not as many women in there, and there's certainly not any people, black people or colour from other, what we'd call BAME, Black, Asian, minority ethnic people, shown in our history. And when things like, Black History Month come along, or LGBT History Month come along, you discover that actually there were people from those minorities who were part of the changes that happened in our countries, but they're not represented. So I completely get why people wanted to pull down that statue at that point. And there's lots of buildings named after him as well. So, yeah, we're definitely seeing that here. And I actually ran a webinar last month on decolonisation of corporate fundraising. And I had a couple of people speak on that. One who works for an international NGO, and he's actually their country manager in Kenya, native Kenyan guy who spoke about it. And also then I had somebody in the UK who'd been doing a lot of work on ethics in NGOs. She's now an independent consultant, and and how ethics differ from country to country. Indonesia is a very devout Muslim country, and so places they'd accept money for would be very different to, say, Holland, which is completely the other end of the scale in terms of what is acceptable in Holland.
Right.
In Holland they have a sex industry that is monitored by the government, and so totally different. And trying to put in an NGO, trying to bring in an ethics policy that is fit for purpose for all those countries was incredibly difficult to do. So, but going back to the whole colonisation thing, we've had something happen here recently where a big funder, Lankelly Chase, who's a big grant funder in the UK, has decided they are going to put themselves out of business over the next 10 years, giving away all their money. So it's an endowment fund.
Yes, I read that.
And that's about colonialism, and not necessarily that their money was made from colonialism, but actually by giving money to countries like in Africa and Asia, are we continuing that colonial kind of patriarchy where, we know better than you do and we'll give you money to sort it out, or we'll come in and sort it out for you. And certainly I've seen, again, very recently, some charities who are now saying, yes, we work in Africa. It was a charity that used to be called Send a Cow, and they recently renamed, I can't remember what they're called now. But what they were set up by a group of Christians in the UK who wanted to send cows to Africa to help people in Africa. And there's all sorts of things wrong with that.
Right.
In terms of, the cows we have here are Frisian cows. They're really not going to survive out in Africa. But they were literally sending cows when they first started back in the 70s, I think it was. But what they've done now, and they were doing their fundraising here and sending money over to Africa, what they've now done is set up an African fundraising body led by local Black Africans to fundraise in their own country, rather than UK fundraising sending out to Africa. So colonialism is kind of hitting us in so many different ways, and some of it is the past, but some of it is kind of our unconscious colonialism that is going on in the way that we speak to people and the terms we use and that sort of thing. And a lot of that is, as I said, it's unconscious. So, I'm learning a lot about that personally at the moment as well.
Well, Julia, thank you so much for doing this. If folks wanted to get hold of you, how would they go about doing that?
My website, which is www.amberconsulting.org.uk. Or I'm on LinkedIn, Julia Worthington.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure to get to know you.
Thanks for inviting me. I really enjoyed our chat.
Hi, folks. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button right here.